methods and statistical physics. And this field is interest for machine learning and deep learning. And soon after, he started a science team in Hugging Face. So in this talk, Thomas is going to talk about a very exciting initiative that Hugging Face is leading, the BigScience project. Okay, so the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Thomas.
Thank you, André. Okay, let me share screen. Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, thanks a lot for welcoming me here. So this is actually this is a shared talk with also the first event of BigScience. Well, the second actually, but I would say we call that episode 1, the first event after the introduction of the workshop. And so you're very welcome to join BigScience event as well today. It's all freely open, and I put the link later. So there is just now a gather-town where people are presenting posters. It's quite a small event as well, so you won't feel lost. It's a bit the same size. So in this short talk, I present BigScience, mostly the inception of the project, why we started it, and a little bit overview. And if you want more details of what the people have been doing over the first 2 months of the project, the best is really to go watch the posters of the people in Gathertown of all the working group. So BigScience is a 1-year-long research workshop on large multilingual dataset and large language models. And why do we think it should be there? Well, in many fields of science, and the one I know most is particle physics and physics in general, there are these very large research tools, like the LHC is maybe the very archetypal example, which is this research tool which has involved 10,000 researchers from 100 countries. It led to the discovery of many hadrons, which are these physics particles, publication of 2,800 papers, right? So it's about the deep learning of particle physics. And in many fields, we also see these very large-scale collaborations. So LHC is the biggest one, but there is also ITER for nuclear fusion, and the International Space Station, which is also international research collaboration. And we thought that maybe it's time to build something similar in AI and NLP. And why would it be the right time? Well, we've seen that recently, right? Many developments, many papers are based on training larger language model on larger data sets. And one of the problems is that the compute resources are typically found only in industry. And even in industry, I would say they are only found in a couple of companies. And this poses a number of issues. There's a problem with research. So these models are generally not designed as research tools. So you often lack access to some of the things you would need to answer research questions. For instance, you don't have access to training data. Sometimes the model themselves are private, so you can't really see what's happening in the model. And a lot of research questions are just asked after the model is trained. So you're like, oh, it would have been nice if we had this checkpoint, but no, we don't. So we can't answer our question. Moreover, a lot of these models are Anglo-centric, right? They're mostly trained in English first. Sometimes a multilingual version you made is in the second time, but that's not exactly the same as a fully multilingual model from the ground up, I would say. It's very difficult for academic researchers to be involved in the creation of this model. I think all of them are just created usually by one company, all the recent examples. There is a general lack of diversity in the research team building the models. There's the question of environmentally, like a lot of this model, because they are private, are kind of trained in parallel in many companies. So there is a doubling of the carbon footprint, which actually is usually not documented at all. So there is this question. And there's a lot of like ethical, societal concern. We've seen recently several papers like highlighting the shortcomings in the test corpora used to train this model. There's usually non-representativeness of population. There is some stereotypes, like often there is personally identifying information in the training data set that are then memorized by the model. And so most of the time we just see that all these like ethical, social impact questions, they're just asked a posteriori, I would say, after the model is trained. But it would be a lot better if during the creation of the model, we had some people already thinking about these things. So this is kind of the state. Another point is that if we look around us, there is actually large-scale public compute infrastructure. And a good example is Janzé, which we use for the BigScience project. And as you can see, it's very powerful thing. There is like 2,700 V100 GPUs. So it's definitely one of the things that could be used to build these very large artifacts. And these are public. So basically you just apply for a compute grant. And so early in 2021, I started discussing with Stéphane Riquenat and Pierre-François Lavallée, who are respectively from GNC, who build like a Janzé supercomputer, and Idriss, who is today operating this supercomputer. And we thought like maybe we could make an artifact like this, like a joint collaboration building a research tool. And when I talk about research tool, I'm not talking about the supercomputer itself, but about the model and the data set that can be used as the basis for many research papers, many research studies, right? And so very quickly, we got the Hugging Face team and most of the French academic and industrial labs on board. And we kind of filed together a grant application for 5 million GPU hours, which we estimated would be enough to train a very, very large language model. And following the grant submission, we decided to extend this project to the international research community to make this a multilingual research project from the start. And we started to structure the research project as a research workshop. So research workshop is a very, I would say, simple way to collaborate, right? We just say, oh, let's collaborate. Everybody is doing that on the part-time. That's the I would say the little drawback, right? But the nice thing is that it's very easy to have people on board if I compare that to consortium and more like rigid structures, right? We can just have people join along the full duration of the project. So in April, we heard that the grant was accepted. We had the first kickoff event to officially start the project. And since May, right, these last 2 months, the working group has been starting to work. And today we are presenting the first result and like the roadmap for some working group or first result for the group who have been going a bit faster. And the core research idea, the core, I would say, spark of the project is that it's quite hard to deny that large language model exhibits some intriguing behavior. And that's, I would say, behavior that we were maybe not expecting from purely statistical model, right? So there is some interesting research question, I think, on this large language model. There is some interesting question around large data sets, both from research point of view, but also from a more like ethical and social point of view. And well, I just listed here a few specific area that I personally find interesting, but there is a lot more, I think. But from fundamental point of view, I think there is the question of the limit of what we can do with purely like co-occurrence-based approaches, right? Purely statistical-based approaches. There is an interesting question around what is actually an NLP task when you start doing this zero shot, and what is the relation between a task and a data set. And I think this is very interesting because it questions kind of the fundamental of the field. There's a lot of question around the notion of bias and fairness, around memorization versus generalization, both from a fundamental point of view and from a very practical point of view of memorizing personal information. There's a lot of question around like environmental impact, as I said, around interpretability, what's happening in this model, how do they work, where do they fail, basically, and maybe try to understand why they fail. And so there is really a range of interesting research questions. And here the idea in this project was to really gather everyone from the ground up, from the beginning, from the creation, and like try to consider in advance as many research questions as possible. And so we can prepare everything we need to answer this research question, right? Instead of being just 2 people trying to think about everything, let's be 500 people trying to think about everything. That would be a lot easier. And we try to ask as many questions as possible a priori, around both the data set and the model. There are 2, I think maybe the data set is even, in my opinion, it's even more important artifact than model. But the idea is really to question everything in the beginning. And so when we build this thing, we try to build them in a more useful way for the whole community, I would say. And then there is the outcome. So the first outcome will be to kind of create and share this artifact. So there is this multilingual corpus that we try to build in a way that is, I would say, responsible and diverse and more like mindful of ethical and legal issues. And there is also this very large model where there is a research question around how we can kind of study during the creation of the model this multilingual, this non-trivial zero-shot behavior, and try to make it more robust, in particular to the formulation of the prompt. So here you should check all the poster and presentation of the working group, because they have already done a lot of work on this. And there is also all the code tools that are associated to both artifacts to make them both easy to use. I would say these large language models are not the easiest to run on a small typical researcher workstation. And so we also plan to develop some tools to make this easier. And all this will be created and shared. This is very open science and open source. Kind of the inspiration is obviously also from the open source movement. And there is a meta approach, which is it actually possible to do such very large collaborative experiments around the single model and a single artifact, right? I think it's the first time we see this really happening, with about 500 people kind of collaborating on one single model and artifact creation. And so we also want to document the process itself, and so that in the future, if people want to do that again for other type of models, they can take inspiration, they can keep the good part that worked, they can try to improve the part that didn't work in this experiment. So this is also a meta experiments on open science, I would say. And one example here is that every document is actually openly accessible on the web. If you go on BigScience website and you go on documents, you can read everything. And this is a little bit strange, I would say, in the usual scientific landscape, right, where you can keep everything secret. It's interesting, I think, to see how this is working. And it's also a workshop. So by a workshop, we mean that there is also a lot of traditional aspect of a workshop where we kind of foster discussion. We also have publication and a proceeding venue, so that it's very easy for the members of the workshop to publish the work on the prompts, the work on the dataset governance, and have basically, the idea is to have a lot of small, not small, I mean, a lot of papers from the working group, so with a small number of authors, like 3-4 authors working on dataset governance, and to make it very easy for them to kind of publish their work in something that is recognized as an official publication, I think like that. So it's also just a workshop, right, when you share some things you've been working on and you get them published. And so we have a bunch of live session. The workshop is kind of online for the whole year, and we have a bunch of live session, and today is the episode 1. And we plan to have episode 2 at the end of September, co-located with AI and NLP, and probably every 2 to 3 months, kind of a live session where people can publish things and can share, can post, can show posters, something like that. So in practice, because it's a workshop, also everybody is more or less involved. There is a general advisor role, I would say, that most of the people have, which is kind of following a little bit what's happening. We send a newsletter every 2 weeks. The time commitment is very light. And basically here, the idea is that if you want to react on something, it's very easy to do. And so there is this general scientific or organization advisory role. And then for people who want to be a bit more involved and typically want to participate in a working group, they can join the working groups as members or as a chair or co-chair, which are generally responsible for organizing a bit the work in the working groups. The time commitment of the chair depends a little bit on the working groups. Some working groups are very big, so the time commitment is mostly to kind of organize. And some working groups are smaller, and then the time commitment is a bit higher because the idea is that the chairs are also kind of doing some of the work. And there is a role we have not explored so much, but which is just an attendant in live events and workshop. And here we would like to also kind of use this research workshop to make it a bit more clear for layman people, for like everyone who is not familiar with this large language model, what they are basically. So this, we plan to do that in the coming live events to make this very accessible for the general public. So today there is 25 working groups. They were mostly created, just from bottom up, I would say. So people saying, oh, we need a working group on, well, the first one were dataset and modeling, and then it appears they were too big. So they were kind of split in smaller working groups. And there's about 46 chairs. The working group organize themselves as they want. Most of them have regular bi-weekly meetings. There is also a chairs group where we meet every 2 weeks to discuss like general question and to kind of synchronize where we are. Working groups are still relatively fluid. There is a few new working groups were proposed last week, and it's still possible to propose new working group. It's still very much welcome. Some working group also kind of merged. For instance, we had in the beginning 2 working group on architecture and scaling, but the topic was so close that they were merged in one architecture and scaling working group. So as you can see, there is some specific focus on, as I told you, bias, fairness, social impacts. For instance, we have a meta group on social impact, which is not like a specifically separated group, more like is here to gather the chairs who are like interested in this. And so we have, for instance, evaluation, fairness chairs. Data set creation also has, it doesn't even have a specific working group on social impact because it's just all about, I would say, social impact and ethics. And so, yeah, there's a lot of questions here which are maybe not so common in typical internal company ML group, like collaboration with education and research communities. Why I'm here also at ELLIS presenting, and the idea is that the workshop is not a separate entity in the landscape, but is trying to kind of join force with every network and with every workshop already creating. We don't want to reinvent the wheels. We don't want to like be a competitor to the thing that exists. We want to integrate smoothly in all the landscape of networks of people already collaborating. Here I just show you a little bit more specifically the topics of the working group, so you have a little bit of a better idea. So the working group on dataset, as I told you, is now split in 3 working groups. So it's like a general area dataset. There is one working group on governance of the data and archival strategy, how we can host this dataset and how we can build this. Dataset sourcing is really more focused on finding the sources for the dataset, and dataset tooling is about all the tools around the dataset, how we will filter this. And here there is a strong focus on, well, respecting the rights of the data subject, who are a lot of people actually, people gathering the dataset, the people creating the data themselves, and the people we talk about in the data. And there's this really idea that language is a social object with a social context, and not to consider language as, I would say, regular type of data. I would say yeah. And then documentation, which is related to that is paramount. And we think a lot of currently available large multilingual data set could be better documented. And so we think it's nice if we can start from this as a fundamental part of the scope, I would say. The working group on modeling is the second big one, with also 5 specific working groups in this general area. And the moonshot goal, well, there's a few one, but the early moonshot goal was to try to answer an inner natural language prompted query in natural language in a zero-shot manner. So really this focus on zero-shot manner. People have been doing a lot of work on prompt engineering, and is there a way to make these models more robust to how the prompt is formulated. There's also really this idea of taking multilinguality from the start, and so making sure that the model is not over-optimized, I would say, or optimized for English and then extend it to other languages, but really start from a multilingual view of the training. There is an interesting area on retrieval. Can we use retrieval to improve in particular, the facts, the knowledge that is stored in model? There is a strong focus on metadata, which I think is very interesting. And we've seen recently in a few papers that you can use metadata. This is also a bit related to what I say, speech in context, right? There is always a context to a web page. There is always a context to the data that you find somewhere. And using this context is in many cases the right thing to do, both actually from ethical modeling point of view. And there is obviously the last part, which is architecture and scaling law, right? There is a working group on tokenization. So you're all here working in NLP, so I won't redo the presentation of what is a tokenizer, but obviously you understand it's a big question when you do massive multilingual tokenization, right? You want to do that well. Same here, they have a question of trying to tokenize every scripts fairly. And they are doing very interesting experiment, I think, on what they call scaling law for vocabulary and tokenizer. And so I encourage you to really check they have a very long, nice video today also Then there is a working group on visualization. This is an example from LHC, but all these big, actually all these big scientific tools usually have a lot of data involved and a lot of interesting way to visualize it. So here right now, the most active subpart in this working group, I think, is the training dynamics working group, which is, I think, a super interesting area and which is definitely underexplored in this very large language model because nobody really share what happened during the training. And so here the idea is really to be mindful about this and try to document and to visualize what's happening during the training of the large language model. So here also I encourage you to get a look of what they plan to do, what they study to do. There is a lot of other things you could do, right, with visualization interpretability. So it's really a huge area. You could do bias, and you could investigate, obviously, the latent space and everything. And then the four very big area also is evaluation. It is also one of the area that is so large that it has been splitted in 5 working groups, covering different aspects. One is extrinsic evaluation, all right, task-based. How does the model perform on actually task we care about and where we have interesting metrics. There is intrinsic, how can we evaluate the models in itself, like typically perplexity, but you have also a probing kind of thing. There is generalization robustness. So because we want a model which is doing 0 shot, obviously generalization robustness is a very strong focus. And there is, from the ground up, also this attention to fairness, harmful behavior, what bias does the model encode, how can we measure them, and multilinguality. Here also the question is to try to be sure that we don't evaluate on English first and then other languages, but we try to take a multilingual perspective from the start. A meta working group is social impact, which is basically gathering chairs interested in social impact in the workshop. And here the idea is to also take a meta step. So for instance, today they are presenting an evaluation of the participants of BigScience, how diverse they are. And obviously they are a bit less diverse than we would have hoped. So the idea is also to see how we can improve this diversity. And they want to, to basically evaluate the social impact of the project as a whole. So it's also, it included at the beginning a carbon footprint group, but now we have split it here in a separate carbon footprint group, which is estimating basically a lot better on trying also to document how we can estimate a lot better the carbon footprint from training this model. And here the nice thing is that we have access to a very open supercomputer where we can have a lot of information about, what's the footprint. So obviously we have a working group on scaling, right? We're training hopefully 200 billion parameter models. So there is this huge question around how do you scale that efficiently? We have the compute budget in hours. So we want to make the best efficient, the most efficient use of these hours. And so this is also a very interesting challenge. And the last one, which is, I would say, as I said, the reason we're here today is that we have a working group on collaborating with all the communities that exist around BigScience. And so here the idea is to try to engage first with other research workshops, other research networks, and second with also undergraduates, high school students, and even the general publics. So we have a few ideas, and we hope that with the first kind of small scale models that would make also good, I would say, good first tools to try to make interesting projects like a small hackathon or like participating in opening the work for some people to participate in the evaluation of part of the model or proposing some interesting events. And last one is a couple of groups on more focused fields, and a good example is biomedical domain. Okay, we've seen recently, right, with AlphaFold and things like that, how AI and large models could be useful for like biomedical domain. They have very this is probably where they could have the strongest impact in the short term. And here the idea is to make sure that the model can be used in biomedical domain well. So to make sure that it has in the training data set the relevant words, that the tokenization is well done, that there is also a question around data privacy. And here also a couple of people have been proposing working group on more specific domain that I think is very interesting. And the idea is to make sure that when a model is released, the researcher working in this domain can use the model for their research question. So what's coming next? Today, as I told you, you're very welcome to join the Gazettown or the live stream. It's all very easy. You just go to the BigScience website. It's on the next slide. And then on the event, you see the link to the Gazettown, the link to the YouTube channels. So you can see what the people have been doing for the past 2 months in a lot more detail than what I've shown now. And the next event will be in September. We'll be co-located with INLG, thanks to Angela Fan, and Matthias Susanna, who organized this. And the same concept will be as today, which be to share and publish ongoing work and to kind of brainstorm and to also meet in person. We would have loved to make a lot more offline meeting, obviously, but right now it will still be online. Hopefully at the end of the year, we can do something in person that would also add another dimension to what's happening. So thanks a lot for listening. This is the link to today's event, where it's quite a complex link, but if you go just to bigscience.huggingface.co and you click on the events page, you will find this. And there is a Twitter where we can share a little bit what's happening. And this is a quick summary. It's a 1-year workshop where we try to create and share a large multilingual data set and a large multilingual language model for research. We try to foster discussion on this large model and to try to make an experiment in collaborative research. And today there is about 500 participants from about 50 countries. We do have a significant compute budget, as I told you, about 5 million compute hours. So yeah. Thanks a lot for having me. I'm very happy to be able to talk about this research workshop today.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for the exciting talk. We have 5 minutes for questions. If you want to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
You can post the slides. Yeah. I will send you the slides, Andre. But yeah.
Thank you.
If you want, you can already see they're all like also open. If you go on BigScience documents, you will find the slides there.
Perfect. Okay, I'll kick it off with a question. So, I mean, this is still work in progress, so I guess you still don't have the full answers yet. But so far, from what you observed, what have been the biggest challenges or the biggest surprises of this project? Compared to previous initiatives for training large-scale language models. Maybe something related to the focus on multilinguality or some specific aspects that the BigScience project is tackling. Do you have something to say about that?
Yes, so it's only 2 months, right? So I would say on the scientific side, we still, I think the most interesting work on, I would say the scientific side, but obviously it's also a bit biased because I can't follow everything that's happening. But I think data governance was very interesting because they are really trying to find a way to solve this problem. Well, to really improve this problem of hosting a very large multilingual data set in a way that make it very useful for research and in a way that make it also very compatible with legal, ethical issues. So I think it's very interesting. On the more scientific side, there is a lot of super interesting discussion. There was some preliminary work on prompting, a very strong effort on. So they have made actually a resource, which I think is also very useful, and they will share. Well, I think it's already shared, but they will publish and share more widely, which is a data set of a wide diversity of prompt for the common task and the common data set that we have today. So it's a metadata set. It's a data set of prompt about data set. There is more like there is 1,500 or even more prompts. So it's very interesting for the zero-shot kind of behavior. How much of these prompts are like picked by models and can be used. So there have been a lot of work on this question of robustness of prompting, which I think is very interesting. And then, yeah, each working group is also tokenization working group has been also doing a lot of things. So it's a little bit hard to pick a winner yet, I would say. And for me, on the meta aspect, it's the question how you get people to work together and how you manage the incentive and so it's also very interesting from this point of view. And it's obviously, as you can tell, not as easy as it would have looked from the beginning, right? We all have very good idea. We say, oh, let's work together, but then you need to publish papers. So we had to find a way to have proceedings and all this thing. And this is still ongoing work, but I think we're heading really in the right direction.
Okay. I don't see any more questions in chat, but if you want to ask a question, you can just unmute. Yeah.
Perhaps I would ask one quick question. Hi, Thomas. Based on your presentation, I understand that the goal is still primarily to build one big multilingual model, right? On the last slide, you had one big. So do you have any thoughts, or are there any discussions or considerations of, building one to rule them all versus some kind of modularization and building perhaps n smaller models or n monolingual or bilingual models or something in that direction? So what's the kind of underlying motivation for one huge multilingual model?
Oh yeah, I mean, here the idea is that well, first I think that the idea of the project was really to try to reach a scale which is not doable by every single lab. I would say, if we just train like 100 billion, a billion parameters is something that a lab can do today, I think. So it's not super useful to spend a lot of effort to do that. So we really wanted to reach this scale where we see this kind of zero-shot behavior strongly kicks in. So like over 100 billion parameter, I would say. At least people say it's over 20 billion parameters somewhere. And so there we had the choice to either select a very limited subset of languages, but then we also think that training one other English language model is maybe not the best use of our compute budgets. So we decided to train one multilingual model. Yeah. But the question is open, right? And also, even though the compute budget is very significant, it's definitely not infinite, and it's still, I would say, quite small when you compare to like, for instance, what companies like NVIDIA has. And so, yeah, I think in the future, if we had a lot more budget, it would have been even better to train a set of models that would be more monolingual. This being said, I also think that cross-linguality in this large multilingual model is an interesting research topic. So I think this also may lead to some interesting discovery or papers or about the multilinguality in the model. But yeah, the question was heavily discussed. Also, the question of limiting to NLP and maybe having more modality, right, was also, I think, an interesting question. Here also, the question, it's a little bit a trade-off between how much compute you want to use and the size you want to reach, right? And the more you add, like in particular, vision is quite compute heavy, and that means really a lot smaller model in the compute budget we have. So everywhere we are a little bit scared to end up with a too small model that in the end is not as useful as it could be.